The first night alone was worse than I expected. 7:15 that evening, I sat in my truck outside Riverside Memorial watching the last of the daytime staff stream out through the glass doors. They moved quickly, heads down, like people trying to beat the rain even though the sky was clear. That should have been my second clue that the place wasn't normal. Nobody lingers after dark. By 8:10, Pamela had completed the brief walkthrough. She showed me the storage closet, the supply cart, the third-floor access stairwell, and the locked double doors that separated the psychiatric wing from the rest of the hospital. Her explanations were calm, methodical, rehearsed. Then she left with a polite good night, heels clicking down the stairwell until the sound vanished. Silence rushed in behind her. The kind of silence that feels intentional. The third floor hadn't been used in years, but the lights still worked. Buzzing, flickering fluorescence that gave everything a washed-out pallor. The air smelled stale, like dust warmed over old electronics. My footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing off empty patient rooms with curtainless windows and abandoned beds pushed against the walls. I told myself it was just another building. 4 walls, old equipment, nothing supernatural, but my body didn't buy it. My shoulders stayed tight, every hair on my arm standing at attention. At 9:45, I started in the main hallway, pushing the mop bucket past a nurse's station frozen in time, scattered forms, a coffee cup stained dark at the bottom, a computer monitor draped with a cloth. A thin layer of dust coated everything except for the chair. The rolling chair behind the desk, dustless, clean, recently moved. I stopped, grip tightening on the mop handle. Pamela had been with me the whole walkthrough. She hadn't touched it. No one else had been here. A faint shuffle of feet drifted from down the corridor. I froze. The sound came again, soft, slow, like someone walking in paper slippers. I remembered, Rule 1, do not engage beyond acknowledging their presence. My throat felt like it was filled with cotton. I stepped toward the noise, heart pounding in my ears. The corridor angled left where the day room sat. I rounded the corner cautiously. A man stood by the far window, not moving, just staring out into the dark parking lot 3 stories below. Hospital gown, bare feet, gray hair matted. He didn't turn, didn't speak, didn't seem to notice me. And the dust around his footprints was freshly disturbed. I swallowed hard, reminding myself of Pamela's rules. Acknowledge their presence, nothing more. My voice barely cooperated. Evening, I said softly. The man didn't turn. Didn't blink. He kept staring through the glass as if something outside held him frozen in place. His hospital gown hung loosely on his thin frame, and his shoulders rose and fell in a slow, uneven rhythm. The air around him felt colder, like I'd stepped into a pocket of winter. I took one careful step back. Rule 3, do not attempt to explain the ward is closed. Rule 5, never touch or guide them physically. Good. I had no intention of getting close enough to touch him. I backed into the hallway, forcing myself to breathe normally. It was 9:58. I was barely an hour into my shift. If this was what Clay dealt with regularly, I suddenly understood why he'd walked out without notice. The corridor felt longer on the way back to my cart. The overhead lights flickered again, twice, maybe 3 times, before settling into their steady buzz. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the man to be standing behind me. But he stayed by the window, unmoving, a silhouette carved out of shadow and fluorescent light. At 10:15, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly again, but this time they weren't coming from the same direction. I turned toward the west wing, another row of patient rooms, the doors open like dark mouths. The footsteps were lighter, quicker, almost playful. Not the shuffling of hospital slippers. My pulse spiked. "Hello?" My voice cracked. The footsteps stopped immediately, as if whoever or whatever was making them had been caught listening. A low creaking sound drifted out, like someone slowly rocking back and forth on a bed frame. I gripped the mop handle again, lifting it slightly like a makeshift weapon. I knew it was pointless, but instinct took over. My feet carried me cautiously toward the sound, even though every part of me begged to leave the floor and call security. I reached the first doorway and peeked in. Dark. Empty. Second doorway, same thing. But at the third doorway, the rocking noise grew louder. I stepped inside. The bed was rocking on its metal legs, softly, rhythmically, though no one was sitting on it, and on the wall above the headboard, someone had traced a message through the dust with a fingertip. "Don't talk to her!" I stared at the words, skin crawling. There was only one problem. I didn't know who her was. The message clung to the wall like a threat carved into stone. "Don't talk to her!" My first instinct was to deny what I was seeing. Dust shifts, air vents push patterns around. Maybe someone from years ago scribbled it. Maybe Clay. Maybe a bored nurse before the ward shut down. But the dust around the letters was fresh, untouched, except for the strokes of someone's finger. Someone who had been here recently, or was still here. A faint tapping echoed somewhere behind me. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 more. I stepped back into the hallway, pulse hammering at my ribs. The corridor stretched out in both directions, seeming longer than it had before. Empty, too empty, the kind of empty that felt staged, like something was waiting just out of view. At 11:10, the overhead lights dimmed for a split second before flaring back to full brightness. A usual power fluctuation? Maybe. But paired with the tapping in the rocking bed, it felt like a warning. I reached the nurse's station and flicked open the logbook, hands trembling slightly. Clay's handwriting filled the first several pages, neat block letters, each entry dated. The early ones were mundane, mop tall, emptied trash, lights flickering in day room. Then his tone changed. Saw someone in room 304, not on roster, didn't speak. Heard laughter in south wing, no one present. Woman in patient gown asked for her chart. Didn't respond when I told her I couldn't help. I stopped at his final entry, dated a week before he disappeared from the job. If she talks to you, don't answer. My breath caught. There it was again, she. The same warning I'd seen scrawled in dust. The same subject no one had bothered to mention in training. I checked the hallway behind me again, still empty. At 11:30, while I was wiping down the station counter, a soft voice drifted from the far end of the hall. A woman's voice. Calm, even, almost polite. "Excuse me, sir?" It floated gently, like a nurse calling a patient. Not threatening, not frantic, but it froze me in place. I didn't turn. Rule 1, do not engage. Clay's notes, if she talks to you, don't answer. The voice came again, closer this time. "Sir, could you help me?" My throat locked, sweat prickled my back. She was moving down the hallway toward me, her footsteps so quiet they sounded like part of the air itself. I kept my eyes fixed on the counter, and the voice stopped just a few feet behind me. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. I just stared at the counter as if it could anchor me to the world I understood. Behind me, the silence thickened, wrapped itself around my shoulders like cold hands. The woman didn't speak again, but I could hear the faint shift of fabric, like a hospital gown brushing against tile. She was close, too close. My instinct screamed to run, but Pamela's rules beat louder in my head. Do not engage, do not explain, do not touch. Clay's warning pulsed underneath it, sharper, more desperate. If she talks to you, don't answer. At 11:35, the lights overhead flickered once, then again. The woman inhaled softly behind me as though surprised by something. Then her breath moved closer, brushing the back of my neck like a cold draft slipping through a window. I forced myself to move, slowly, deliberately. I reached for the logbook with a steady hand I did not feel, closed it gently, and stepped away from the nurse's station. I kept my back to her. Every step I took down the hallway felt like walking through water, thick, heavy, resisting. I didn't hear her follow, but the silence felt wrong, too controlled, as if she were holding her breath. At the corner, I allowed myself one glance over my shoulder. She was there. A woman in a faded blue hospital gown stood in the middle of the corridor, facing me, thin, barefoot. Her hair hung long and black, hiding most of her face. She wasn't moving, didn't sway, didn't breathe. She just stood, watching. The lights above her hummed, flickering again as if struggling to remain lit. I turned away and forced myself toward the supply closet. My heart beat so hard it hurt. By 11:45, I had locked myself inside, leaning against the shelves stacked with bleach and gloves. I stayed there until my pulse slowed enough for my thoughts to organize themselves. And that's when I noticed something else, something far worse than her appearance. The rule sheet, the one Pamela gave me on my first day. It had 7 protocols, 7 numbered lines, 7 firm instructions. But here in the supply closet, taped to the inside of the door, was a second copy older, yellowed at the edges, typed in the same courier font. Except this one had 8 rules, and the 8th rule read, if she is already aware of you, do not let her learn your name. A chill rolled through me, because a minute ago I'd left the logbook open, and the first word on that page was my name. My name sat there in bold, handwritten ink, first line, top of the logbook page, clear as a spotlight in a dark room. If the woman in the hallway had seen it, if she had only leaned forward, glanced over my shoulder, then the 8th rule wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. 11:52. I pressed my back against the supply closet door, listening. The hallway was silent again, unnervingly so. Hospitals are never fully quiet. Buildings breathe, pipes click, vents rattle. But the 3rd floor had fallen into a vacuum-sealed stillness, like the entire wing was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for me. I took a long breath, forcing myself to think. Clay had left this second rule sheet for someone. For me, maybe. Or for whoever came after him. He must have known the official 7 rules were incomplete, that something else roamed the halls at night, something that didn't follow hospital protocols. My hand shook as I folded the old paper and shoved it into my pocket. At 12:05, the closet light flickered once, then steadied. Time to move. Hiding wouldn't save me. The shift wasn't even halfway over. I cracked the door open an inch, peering down the hallway. Empty. The woman was gone. My relief didn't last long. The dust on the floor near the nurse's station was disturbed. Fresh footprints, small and narrow, walking in a slow arc around the desk. She'd been looking at the logbook, hunting for something, hunting for me. I wiped the sweat from my palms and approached the station carefully. The logbook lay open, not where I'd left it. Someone had flipped a few pages deeper. The book now rested on an entry of Clay's dated 2 months before his disappearance. She knows my name now. I shouldn't have answered her. I shouldn't have looked up when she said it. My stomach tightened. A faint hum drifted from the end of the hallway. A melody. Soft and almost tuneful, like someone humming to comfort themselves. A lullaby without words. I didn't want to follow it, but the sound crept along the walls, winding its way into my ears, tugging at my attention in a steady, gentle pull. Without realizing, my feet began to move. Down the corridor, past the patient rooms, toward the old day room door. The humming stopped. Then a quiet, breathy whisper drifted out from the darkness inside. "I know you." My blood turned to ice, not just because of the words, but because the voice had used my name, exactly, perfectly, unmistakably, and I hadn't told her. I stopped moving so suddenly my shoes squeaked on the tile. The whisper, my name, still hung in the air, thin as spider silk and twice as hard to shake off. My stomach twisted. I hadn't spoken my name to anyone on this floor, not out loud, not even under my breath. She shouldn't have known it. 12:23. The hallway lights dimmed again, humming like they were struggling to stay alive. I forced myself backwards, step by slow step, keeping my eyes fixed on the day room doorway. The darkness inside looked thicker than normal darkness, like it had weight, shape, intention. Come in," the voice murmured. My name came right after, gentle, coaxing, as if we were old friends and she simply wanted company. I swallowed hard. The urge to run hit me like a physical shove, but some sick curiosity kept me rooted. I needed to see, needed to know what Clay had faced before he vanished. But rules were rules, and she had already broken them by knowing me. 12:30. I backed into the nearest patient room, closing the door halfway to watch the hall through the crack. My breathing came shallow, controlled. The day room doorway remained still. No movement, no flicker, no silhouette. Maybe she'd slipped out another way. Then the hallway lights at the far end blinked off. Not all of them, just the last 2, plunging 30 feet of corridor into pitch black. A second later, the next set blinked off. Then the next. She wasn't walking, she was coming in the dark. The blackout advanced section by section. A slow, calm pursuit, not rushed, not frantic. Patient, certain. The lights died closer and closer until only 2 panels remained lit, one above me, one above the day room. I backed farther into the patient room until my calves pressed against the bed frame. My hand brushed something on the mattress, a folded piece of paper. For a moment I hesitated, then snatched it up. Clay's handwriting. She moves in absence, not in light. If she reaches your door before the lights return, don't make a sound. She listens for breathing. My pulse thundered in my ears. The lights outside my room flickered. Once, twice, then the last panel winked out. Darkness swallowed the hallway, so absolute I couldn't see my own hands. Her footsteps were silent, but the soft drag of her gown brushed the tiles like a whisper. Closer, closer. Breathing wasn't an option now, but panic made my lungs burn. In the pitch dark, she stopped right outside my door. Then the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob turned with a soft metallic click that sliced straight through my spine. I pressed my back against the wall, forcing my body flat, willing myself to become part of the shadows. My lungs screamed for air, but Clay's words burned hotter in my mind. She listens for breathing. The knob twisted again, slow, deliberate, like fingertips exploring an old familiar motion. Then came the faintest push against the door. It creaked inward an inch, then another, until a thin sliver of darkness slid across the floor toward me. I didn't move. Couldn't. Every muscle in my body locked tight. Her gown brushed the tile again, not footsteps, just the whisper of fabric. She wasn't walking so much as gliding, her movements soft but purposeful. The air temperature in the room dipped instantly, sinking to a winter chill. My teeth threatened to chatter, and I clenched my jaw to stop them. 12:39. The darkness outside felt alive, like something breathing just beyond the threshold. Then she spoke. Not loud, not sharp, but close, too close. I see you. The words slid into the room like cold fog. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. I clamped a hand over my mouth, desperate to muffle any sound. If she heard even a scrap of breath. The door pushed wider. Her silhouette appeared in the gap, a faint outline, not solid, shaped more from shadow than flesh. Her head tilted slowly, as if listening for a heartbeat. Then her voice softened, threaded with a strange sadness. "Don't hide from me!" I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't trust myself not to look. Opening your eyes in the dark feels harmless until something is staring back. The silence stretched impossibly long. Then, abruptly, the overhead lights snapped on with a violent buzz, so bright it stabbed my eyes even through closed lids. I staggered, gasping instinctively. When I opened my eyes, the doorway was empty. The hall was fully lit again. But she had been there, and she hadn't left quietly. A streak of smeared, wet footprints, bare, small, unmistakably human, led from my doorway back down the hall. They glistened against the tile, darkening as they stretched toward the day room. A chill crawled up my spine. Those weren't dust footprints. They were damp, like she had walked through water. Or blood. A soft crackle came from the intercom above the nurse's station. Then a woman's voice, her voice, whispered through the speakers, "You can't hide your name from me." Her whisper faded from the intercom, but the static lingered like a residue, thin, hissing, unnatural. I stared up at the speaker, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. The PA system was ancient. Pamela had told me it wasn't even connected to the main hospital network anymore. It shouldn't have worked! Not on this floor! Not for her! The hall lights dimmed again, but only slightly, like they were bracing for whatever she wanted to do next. I forced myself to keep moving. Standing still felt like an invitation. I followed the wet footprints cautiously, careful not to step in them. Each one was clearer than the last small, defined toes, a narrow heel. Human! Too smooth for someone walking. More like gliding, more like she wasn't touching the floor at all. The trail led to the day room. Of course it did. I stopped at the doorway, gripping the frame with sweating hands. The day room was the largest space, on the floor tables overturned, chairs stacked in a haphazard pyramid, windows covered with decades of grime. A faint flicker came from the far corner where an old television sat on a rolling cart. The TV wasn't plugged in, but its screen glowed a dull gray, humming with broken static. I stepped closer, drawn despite myself. The static shifted, warped into a haze of black and white shapes. Then something began to form, a silhouette, a woman's shape, long hair hanging, shoulders slumped, motionless. My breath hitched. Her head lifted on the screen, not fast, not sudden, but with slow, unnatural precision. She turned as if looking directly at me through the glass. And then she smiled. I stumbled backward, knocking into one of the tables. The TV flickered violently, the image stretching for a split second into a face too pale, too thin, too hollow. Not human, not anymore. Then the television shut off. Instantly, the room plunged back into silence. A soft sound broke it, something dripping. I turned slowly. On the wall to my left, new words were smeared in streaks, dark, wet streaks that ran down the paint like tears. "You answered!" I shook my head, whispering, I didn't speak to you." But my voice caught as another realization punched through me. Clay's notes, his warnings, his last message. She doesn't need your voice, only your attention. And I had just given her mine. A sudden slam echoed down the hallway behind me. A door, hard, violent, followed by another whisper. "You're mine now." The next evening, a heavy storm pressed itself over the hills of Wyoming, turning the sky an iron gray and drowning the ranch in the sound of distant thunder. I had been pacing the living room for nearly an hour, waiting for the light on the radio to pulse again, waiting for another cryptic warning. But the radio stayed dark, almost stubbornly silent, and the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I told myself the rules were enough. I told myself Wes knew what he was doing when he wrote them. But the truth was beginning to settle on me like a cold weight. Something was escalating. I finally forced myself to check the outer windows again. Nothing unusual. Just the wind dragging branches against the siding and the faint suggestion of movement in the fields that I prayed was just grass bending. By the time I returned to the hallway, the power flickered once, twice, then steadied. That was when I heard it, a sound that did not belong in this house. A creak, another creak, slow, measured, heavy, footsteps on wooden stairs. But there was no staircase inside the ranch except for the one leading up to the attic, and I had blocked that door with a dresser after the night something scratched from the other side. These footsteps weren't coming from above. They were coming from below, from the basement, a basement that Wes never mentioned, a basement that should not exist. A chill ran up my spine as I backed away from the hallway. The footsteps continued, deliberate, impatient, like whoever or whatever wasn't in a hurry. It knew someone was listening. It wanted to be heard. I grabbed the lantern from the table, but my hand trembled so violently the glass rattled. Then the radio flared to life, bright red, flickering urgently. I spun toward it, heart hammering. The speaker hissed, then formed a single whispering voice. Wes's voice, strained and breathless. "Don't open the door." The lantern almost slipped from my grasp. My gaze snapped to the end of the hallway. That was when I saw it. A door. A door that had never been there before. Old wood, gray with age, set into the wall like it had been part of the house for decades. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, with terrifying softness, a knock. Just one, like a question, like an invitation. I stepped back, pulse roaring in my ears, because now I knew the ranch wasn't creating rules, it was creating rooms. The door didn't belong. My rational mind screamed it, tried to convince me it was a trick of the shadows, a warped reflection on the walls, but there it was, solid, unmistakable, in a hallway I'd walked a dozen times without ever noticing it. The grain of the wood looked old, dark, streaked with something that caught the lantern's light like wet ink. A brass handle gleamed faintly, as if someone had polished it recently. I held my breath and edged closer. Each step made the floorboards groan beneath me. The radio crackled again, a soft static this time, as if protesting my approach. I wanted to turn away. I wanted to run. But the sound of that single knock earlier, soft, deliberate, gnawed at the corners of my mind. Someone or something was behind that door, and now I couldn't unhear it. Trembling, I reached for the handle. My fingers brushed the cold metal. It was heavier than I expected. Hesitation struck me. My hand hovered, almost willing itself to let go, when a voice whispered from the doorframe behind me, low, soft, and familiar. "Don't." It was Wes. The warning echoed inside my head. I knew the rules, I knew the consequences, but curiosity, that terrible human flaw, had me frozen in place. I turned the knob. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty hallway. Darkness swallowed the threshold. The air that escaped was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of earth. It wasn't the familiar dust and hay scent of the ranch, it was something older, something that had been buried. Lantern raised, I peered inside. A stairwell spiraled downward, carved from stone, descending into blackness. The edges of the steps were worn, slick, as if countless feet had tread here long before me. The walls closed in on either side, cramped and oppressive. The first step groaned beneath my weight. My reflection wavered in the lantern's light, distorted against the walls. I swallowed hard, forcing my pulse to slow. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to ignore the rules and the door entirely. But I knew I couldn't, not anymore. A faint whisper drifted upward from below. Finally, the word didn't belong to the wind. It didn't belong to the house. It belonged to someone or something waiting in the darkness. I stepped down cautiously. The staircase seemed to stretch endlessly. With each step, the air grew colder, wetter, almost alive, pressing against my skin, whispering warnings I couldn't fully understand. And yet, I couldn't stop. By the time the last flicker of lantern light touched the final step, I realized the stairwell led somewhere I had never imagined existed. Somewhere the rules didn't reach. Somewhere Wes had feared to go. The bottom steps shivered under my weight. Cold seeped through my shoes and bit into my ankles like icy fingers. I shone the lantern forward, and the beam cut through damp shadows, revealing a stone floor slick with moisture. The stairwell opened into a wide chamber I could not have imagined existed beneath the ranch. The air smelled of earth and rot, with a faint metallic tang that made my stomach twist. Walls lined with shelves rose on either side. They held jars, bottles, boxes, contents obscured by grime and age. Some had labels in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Others were blank, but all radiated a sense of long-forgotten purpose. I swallowed and forced my legs forward, keeping my lantern high. Every step echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Then I saw her. A figure crouched at the far end of the room, motionless. Long hair fell over her face, shadowing her features, but I knew, just knew, that it was the same woman from the hospital. The aura around her made the air shimmer, the darkness bending slightly toward her. My chest tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe slowly. "Who's there?" I whispered, though I knew she had already heard. No reply, only the faintest rustle of movement like silk brushing stone. I remembered Clay's words, whispered to himself in a journal long abandoned. "She does not need to speak. Only attention, only acknowledgement draws her closer." The lantern trembled in my hand, casting dancing shadows along the walls. I noticed something new, a series of symbols carved into the stone floor, forming a crude circle around her. They were strange, angular, almost alive in the dim light, and the air within the circle seemed heavier, thicker, charged with tension. I stepped closer, curiosity mingling with dread. The moment my foot crossed the edge of the symbols, the temperature dropped further. My breath clouded in the air. She lifted her head slowly, revealing pale eyes that reflected the lantern light like twin moons. And then she smiled, calm, knowing, impossible. A low hum began to vibrate through the floor. The lantern flickered violently. Shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, ripple, and move toward me. The air filled with faint whispers, a chorus of voices unintelligible yet urgent. I stumbled backward, one step, 2 steps, and then my foot landed on something wet, something warm. I glanced down. My name was scratched into the stone, letters deep and slick with fresh blood. And at that moment I realized the rules weren't just warnings, they were chains, and I had just walked right into them. I froze. My boots pressed against slick, dark streaks on the stone floor. The smell hit me then, a coppery tang that made bile rise in my throat. The circle of symbols wasn't just a boundary, it was a trap. The woman at its center tilted her head, eyes gleaming like black pools in the lantern light. Every instinct screamed at me to step back. Every rational thought dissolved under the weight of her gaze. Rule 8, do not let her learn your name. I had already failed. Her lips curved in that impossible smile, slow and deliberate. Shadows stretched from the walls, creeping toward me, fingers of darkness curling like smoke over stone. I could hear them, soft whispers, unintelligible yet insistent, wrapping themselves around my mind. I tried to pull away, but my boots seemed glued to the blood-slick floor. The circle pulsed faintly, as if breathing. My pulse matched it, quick, shallow, frantic. Each heartbeat felt like it echoed through the stone chamber, announcing my presence. Then a voice, not hers, cut through the whispers, sharp and distant. Remember the rules. It was Wes. The warning gave me a fraction of clarity. I had to move carefully, precisely, not in panic, not in desperation. I inched backward, slow, deliberate, keeping my eyes locked on her. Every step was agony. The shadows twined closer. The hum from the circle grew louder, vibrating through my chest, my teeth, my bones. 12:59, the lantern flickered violently. My hand slipped, and I almost dropped it. The shadows reacted immediately, curling toward me, feeding on the falter. I clenched the handle with both hands, teeth gritted, lungs burning. Then the symbols on the stone began to glow faintly, phosphorescent and sickly, illuminating more of the chamber. I could see them in their full horror now. Jagged lines, spirals, scratches that seemed less carved and more clawed into existence. And within the circle, the woman rose slowly, as if gravity itself was bowing to her will. My mind screamed for escape. I had to get past the edge of the circle. One misstep, one hesitation, and I would be trapped, body, mind, and name claimed. I'd bent my knees, gathered every ounce of focus, and bolted toward the far corner, where the steps leading back to the stairwell offered my only hope. Shadows lunged. The woman's voice, low, velvet, and deadly, filled the room. Do not leave yet! My legs burned as I ran. Every instinct screamed to stop, to obey, but I couldn't. Not now. The circle wasn't just a trap. It was a predator, and I was the prey. My boots slammed against the wet stone as I sprinted toward the stairwell, the circle's glow fading behind me, but not the sense of being hunted. Shadows stretched, coiling and writhing, clawing at the edges of my vision. The hum of the symbols lingered in my ears, vibrating through every bone like the sound of 1,000 whispered warnings. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Each step felt like a gamble, each breath a borrowed life. The stairwell loomed ahead, narrow, stone descending into blackness I knew I could survive. My hand gripped the railing tightly. The cold metal burned through my gloves, shocking me awake with every jolt. The whispers followed, echoing from below, from all sides. Stay! Stay! The voices cooed, laced with a hunger I couldn't name. I shoved the thoughts from my mind, keeping my focus on the stairs, counting each step. 1, 2, 3, each echoing through the hollow chamber, a steady rhythm in the madness. By the time I reached the landing halfway down, my lungs screamed and my legs threatened to buckle under me. The lantern flickered violently, casting fractured shadows across the walls. And then I saw her again. The woman from the hospital, standing at the bottom of the stairs, impossible, silent, her eyes locked on mine. How had she moved so fast? Her hand rose slowly, almost delicately, as if inviting me, not threatening. And in that instant, the full weight of the rules hit me. Do not let her learn your name. Do not speak. Do not engage. I had given her my attention. 1 step. 2 steps. I bolted the remaining distance, heart hammering, lungs on fire. The bottom of the stairs opened into a stone corridor, dimly lit by faint emergency lights I hadn't noticed before. The smell of damp stone mixed with metal and something else, something alive. My pulse rattled in my ears as I ducked around the corner, nearly colliding with a pile of old crates. The corridor stretched in both directions, twisting like a labyrinth. I had no map, no memory of the floor plan, only the instinct to move. And behind me I heard the softest scrape of fabric sliding across the stone behind a corner and a whisper, I see you, always. The wall seemed to close in, narrowing my path, warping the air around me. Every shadow threatened to leap, every sound screamed pursuit. I didn't pause. I ran blindly, desperately toward some distant exit, some hope of sunlight, some chance to escape what I now understood wasn't bound by floors, rooms, or walls. Because she didn't stay in one place, she followed the darkness, and I had nowhere to hide. I ran blindly through the twisting corridor, my lantern flickering with every step, casting jagged shadows across the wet stone walls. My chest heaved, each breath ripping at my lungs. I had no plan, no strategy, only the primal need to survive. Behind me, the soft scrape of her gown followed, closer, patient, relentless. I rounded a sharp corner and froze. A massive chamber opened before me, wider than any basement room should be, lined with ancient stone pillars that disappeared into shadow. The air was thick here, heavy, almost liquid, and it pressed against my chest with every inhale. The lantern shivered in my grip, threatening to go out entirely. The whispers returned, louder now, layered as if dozens of voices had gathered in the darkness. They circled me, rising and falling like a storm. I pressed my back against a pillar, trying to ground myself, trying to remember the rules. Do not engage, do not speak, do not let her know your name. But it was too late. She was already here. A soft, deliberate clap echoed through the chamber, one hand. Slow, precise. I dared to glance up. The woman stood in the center of the room, illuminated by a faint, sickly glow emanating from the stone floor. Her eyes caught mine, black pools of depthless darkness, the shadows around her twisted, thickening, coiling like living smoke. "You came," she whispered, voice dripping with amusement. "I've been waiting." My heart slammed against my ribs. I took a careful step back. My mind screamed at me to flee, but the floor beneath me hummed, pulsing faintly with the same rhythm as the glowing symbols in the hospital. The circle wasn't just stone, it was power, a tether to her. I realized then that this chamber, this place of stone and shadow, was the heart of it all. The rules, the warnings, Clay's disappearance, they all led here, and I had walked willingly into its center. The lantern flickered again, nearly dying. She raised a hand, slow, graceful, and the shadows reached outward like tendrils stretching toward me. I felt them coil around my ankles, cold and unyielding, tugging at my focus, at my will. Panic surged. I could feel the pull of the darkness, its promise of finality. One wrong move, one whisper of fear, and I would be trapped, body, mind, and name claimed forever. I took a deep, trembling breath. One rule remained, the one I had yet to test, one chance. I would have to act. Before the shadows could close in completely, I stepped forward, lantern raised, voice swallowed by fear, and made a choice that would determine if I escaped or became part of the darkness. I stepped forward into the center of the chamber, the lantern shaking violently in my hand. The shadows rippled around me, thick and cold, coiling like serpents on stone. Her gaze held me, unmoving, patient, the corners of her mouth twitching with a cruel amusement. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to collapse, to surrender. But I remembered the last rule, the one I hadn't fully understood until now. If you feel unsafe, leave immediately and contact security. I exhaled slowly, not a full breath, just enough to steady my nerves and force my mind to obey. I couldn't scream, I couldn't hesitate. The moment of clarity came like a shard of ice. The rules weren't just instructions. They were tools, weapons against her. 1 step, 2 steps. I reached for the floor, right at the edge of the faintly glowing symbols. My fingers pressed into the cold stone. I traced a line, following the strange pattern with deliberate care. The shadows recoiled slightly, like the symbols themselves were fighting against her. She tilted her head, sensing defiance. The whispers surged, desperate, frenzied, but I ignored them. I focused entirely on the symbols, letting my mind sink with their rhythm. One wrong thought and I'd lose everything, but the line of power felt familiar, ancient, protective. The glow flared suddenly, bright and pure, and the shadows shrieked a soundless wail that pressed directly against my skull. She staggered back, claws of darkness retreating. I could feel her fury, the weight of her rage like a physical blow, but the circle held firm beneath me. I didn't look away. I pressed harder, tracing the final curves and angles of the pattern. Her voice hissed, sharper now, like broken glass. "You cannot bind me!" The ground trembled beneath us. Dust and loose stones rattled across the chamber. The lantern flickered, then burned steady again. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shadows retreated entirely. The chamber fell silent. Only the faint hum of the stones remained, like the echo of a heartbeat. I exhaled, hands trembling. The woman was gone. The circle dimmed to nothing. My name was safe. My attention had been my weapon, my focus, my shield. The rules, they weren't arbitrary. They were survival. When I climbed back up the stairwell, the basement door vanished behind me. The ranch returned to its quiet, familiar self, as if the darkness had never existed. I would never forget the cold, the shadows, or the whisper of her voice. I had survived. But the memory of the eighth rule, of the name she had sought and the attention she had demanded, would haunt me forever, because some rules, once learned, never leave, and some darkness never truly disappears.